how things were, bringing you the context of growth. Uh, so I've looked at growth rates starting from 70s, 80s, and up to 2019. 2020 is a different kind of situation, the COVID shock. So what happened was, the first 2 decades, growth was, very tepid, 3%, 3.5% maximum. The growth spurt began with 1990s, and there is a reason for that. 1990, 91, 92, the Bangladesh government accepted the advice of World Bank, IMF, for structural adjustment, some very structural reforms. In 1990, the economy was in shambles. Foreign exchange reserves were, abysmally low. Growth rate had fallen down to, I think, almost zero. Uh, so it was an economic crisis that was actually coupled with a political crisis. There was a political transition that took place. So but then the new government, new political government, took some very bold reforms, very radical reforms to open up the economy. Prior to 1990s, the economy was inward-looking, closed import substituting strategies, uh, too much public intervention, state intervention in the economy. Even, for investment, you needed permission, uh, you know, to invest. So all of that changed in the early 1990s. The trade policy was liberalized. Exchange rate, for the first time, for the first 20 years, exchange rate was fixed. So exchange rate became flexible. So we started the flexible exchange rate system in 1991. The current account was made convertible, but partially because the capital account was not convertible. Market orientation was introduced. Industrial, investment regulation was removed, but investment was liberalized. So there was a lot of opening up of the economy that took place in those early 1990s. And I would argue that those reforms, radical reforms, actually drove the growth acceleration from the 1990 onwards till about 2019, because after the 1990s, there was no really serious economic reforms that really would further accelerate economic growth. So there was nothing that I can point out. One of the things I can, of course, point out is in 2004, there was this decision to float the exchange rate. So this is interesting because, you see, we went for a flexible exchange rate in 1991, and why was this need for floating the exchange rate in 2004? Because although we went for a flexible exchange rate, there's too much intervention in managing the exchange rate until it looked like a fixed exchange rate system. So again, it was IMF that convinced the government it was time to float. And I know that the finance minister lost sleep during that night when the exchange rate was floated, but nothing happened. So everything was okay. So now we are talking again about going for a flexible exchange, more flexible. That means it's not so much as floating the exchange rate, but going for a flexible rate within a larger band. So the band earlier was supposed to be 2.5%, but I think there was no band at all because the exchange rate, the bank rate was at 122 for quite a long period without variation. So this question of, again, too much intervention or too much control had come up, and finally it's good to hear that the exchange rate is going to float again, at least within a larger band, which means there would be variation. Now, why do we need exchange rate variation? Why do we need flexibility in the exchange rate in the first place? Well, flexibility theoretically, what is true is that flexibility in the exchange rate helps to stabilize foreign exchange reserves, helps to stabilize your balance of payments. The current account, we are mainly concerned with our current account balance, which is currently very stable and quite sustainable, less than 1% of GDP. But to continue to maintain that sustainability and to be on a right track, we need the exchange rates to be flexible. Flexibility means that when the balance, when we have a larger trade balance or larger current account balance, the exchange rate will depreciate. That will make imports more expensive. Imports will fall. Exports will be more competitive. Exports will rise, and then you restore the current account balance or trade balance as well. So that's the reason why we need flexibility in the exchange rate. And I tell you, a lot of economists don't look at that. Exchange rate flexibility introduced in the early 1990s actually contributed to the acceleration of economic growth, acceleration of exports. We adopted the strategy of export-led growth in those years, and flexibility of the exchange rate was part of the strategy. So, now let me come to the present now. What is I think people are saying, okay, we had a, change of government, but where is the growth rate gone? Well, we did have a disruption, which is not just political, but also economic. And so we don't expect growth rate to remain what it was prior to COVID. After COVID, the economy was, recovering in fiscal year 2021, but then 2022 we faced that Russia-Ukraine shock, and that, the supply chain shock that was global, it led to lowering of growth rates all around, including Bangladesh. Bangladesh faced this tremendous, supply chain shock, which led to a trade deficit which was beyond control, something like $33 billion, and current account deficit also rising to something like 4 or 5% of GDP, which is very unsustainable. So we came out of that, but what happened was complete mismanagement of the external sector, complete mismanagement of the external sector balances, mismanagement of the exchange rate, and mismanagement of the use of foreign exchange reserves. And that, thankfully, after the change of government, that has stopped. The hemorrhage has stopped. So that is the one benefit that comes out of this change of government. The political pressures and all that is gone. So right now, in terms of macroeconomic management of the external balance, we are on the right track. So what we see now is there is some we have attained macroeconomic stability, but at a lower level of economic performance, in the sense that growth rate that we are now seeing is in the 4% category. But let me tell you that Bangladesh economy has the momentum to grow at 6% anyway. And I tell you, since I've got a lot of historical experience, around early 2000s and late in the 2010s and so on, we used to say, even if Bangladesh does not do any economic reform, it will be growing at 6%. There is the internal momentum. So that is actually the case. So this current growth rate of 4%